I'm Kristen Haynes. I'm the Assistant Director of Rice Creek Field Station. We're so happy you're here. Thank you for coming and joining us for today's reflection hosted by Rice Creek Associates, our wonderful friends group. I'm sure Laurel, our president, may remind folks of this at the end, but for as little as $5 to $15, you could join RCA and help support programs like this and lots of great projects at Rice Creek Field Station. This is very special for me. Don was my PhD advisor, so it's really a fun opportunity here. So Don Leopold, he is a distinguished teaching professor at SUNY ESF. He's been there for 39 years. He came there after completing his PhD at Purdue University. Don has been really prolific, both with publishing over 70 scientific papers, as well as 7 books, including Wildflowers of the Adirondacks, The Trees of New York State, Native Plants of the Northeast, a guide for gardening and conservation, and has had a really kind of rich and varied research interests related to restoration and rare plants and wetlands. And it's really exciting to have Don here today to talk about some common and not so common trees of New York and their uses in the landscape. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Leopold.
One of the highlights of being a professor is having an opportunity to work with so many talented younger minds, and Kristen was one of our best. And so it's fun to come up here and see where she's working. And of course, I know about Rice Creek and a lot about the flora up here and all around here. It's just what a great place to live. And even this time of year, it's been kind of disappointing the last few winters because it hasn't seemed like winter, but it's back. We're looking forward. I would be out on the ice today if it wasn't for this talk. So, and probably not catching anything, but still, there's nothing more fun than sitting out on the ice and waiting for that flag to go up. All right, so the best native tree. So there are so many trees I could talk about, and you've got a list there, and that's about half of what's in. If you're interested in the trees of New York State, there's SU Press a few years ago did this book that they recently released in paperback, so it's not so right. It's amazing that a cover. There's a difference between $150 a cover. It's the same content, but if you're interested in the trees of New York, this built on what was one of the best tree books at the time by H.P. Brown, 1915, the original trees of New York, just really amazing descriptions. So this book is a lot more hardcore botanical and less about landscape. But anyway, if you're interested in the botanical aspects, this is readily available, probably through Amazon, maybe even more reasonably priced. I'm going to talk about some, maybe half, maybe a third of the trees in New York State that sometimes are commonly used in the landscape and sometimes aren't even known. And so I'm hoping that something on that list, you're wondering about. If you're interested in non-native trees, then I usually talk about those. So if you have any questions about any of those at the end, let me know. If you're interested in more information about trees, so a few years ago, I posted 130 tree videos. They're 3 minutes long. They're uncut, they're unedited. So when you watch them, don't expect glossy production or highly edited. But they're 3 minutes roughly. And what I did is I went around with our videographer and we'd walk in places and he'd say, do that tree, and I would do that tree. So a lot of rehearsal. And but the advantage of that is that I cover a lot of the common street trees. So if you're interested in Zelkoven, ginkgo, and all the Chinese, whatever, they're 3 minute vignettes. cram a bunch of information in. And so there's lots of opportunity to go way beyond today for free if you have the time. So let's see which way we're going here. Okay, so what even defines a good tree for the landscape? And there are trees that I left off this list because they don't have any of these or don't have the important attributes. But just having a some aesthetic value. So you think of trees like box elder, which is highly functional, a really good tree for wetland restoration in terms of function. But could you describe the flowers to me? The fall color usually isn't that interesting. I've seen some beautiful specimens, but in general, we're looking for plants that have as much aesthetic value the entire year, ideally. And there are plants that do that. And there are a lot that don't do much of that at all. Cold hardy is obviously important. So if it's native, usually like if it's native to Long Island, that doesn't mean it's native here in New York State. But if it's native in central New York, it's probably hardy almost anywhere in New York. Strong in form and disease and insect resistant. And some of the most beautiful natives of all time in New York are not in that category, like the hemlock. And so in general, we are, unless you're far enough north that the insect will not survive, some of these trees, I would say, unless you're willing to treat them, I wouldn't recommend. And for urban plantings, there's another layer that those trees have to be able to do, and they have to be able to tolerate compacted soils. Interestingly, floodplain trees fit these tolerances, and so that's why you see a lot of like American sycamore and silver maple. You see a lot of floodplain trees in urban environments because physiologically they are really well adapted to the conditions. Tolerant to salt, and there's some really beautiful trees that are tolerant of the anaerobic conditions, but not of the salt. Black gum's a great example. We've lost almost all the black gums on the ESF campus because of our salt application. And it's ironic because black gum was used to transport salt water from Onondaga Lake to places where the water was evaporated for the salt. But as a living tree, it does not tolerate salt. That fits the space. This is often a big mistake we make with planting trees. You see it in every landscape. You see these trees put into spots as if the tree was presumed to never grow. And, as a gardener, you want your stuff to grow, but then you got the dilemma. I've got to remove a hemlock in my yard this winter because when it's windy, it just rams up against my gutter and it's completely collapsed the gutter. When that was planted, apparently the people didn't realize that hemlock grew, and hemlock got pretty big over time. So it certainly keeps landscapers in business to plant things that need to be replaced every 5 years. But a lot of stuff in the garden, the fun part is watching it grow over decades. And then the litter, we have some neighbors who have, and I put honey locust on there. Honey locust isn't native. Honey locust is naturalized to New York, but it's not native. And honey locust is a really nice tree in a lot of ways, unless you have the female. And then the pods are really a nuisance. I mean, it's just like cut up leather belts that are all over the lawn, and they're not going to disappear. Now, people plant honey locust because the leaflets disappear, but the fruit doesn't. And so, there are all these trade-offs that the more you learn about trees, you start settling on those attributes that make sense for you and your level of interest in maintenance and other issues. And then so I work with Stu DeMont. We have a number of projects to create food forest systems. So we're thinking more and more about, let's forget about the plant having to be native, and let's focus on what can we get the most things to eat from in the herbaceous layer, shrub layer, and the overstory layer. And so we're putting together these assemblages of species, and we've got some projects out in Syracuse already. And they're funded because the people who are funding these want us to figure out ways to minimize flow into drain systems. And evapotranspiration of trees dry out the ground such that you get less flow. But we're interested in the food component because we have a lot of sections in Syracuse where people are not getting sufficient nutritional food. And so what if we could put a lot of these plants in little forests, like abandoned lots, where people could pick these things at different times of the year. And so this project has been gaining more and more steam, but I just wanted to highlight some of those right up front, just before I get in, because they fit under the small tree category primarily, the first few. And there's some trees that are in the sub canopy, like if you walk around these woods here, always in the understory is the serviceberry. Now, I don't know what happened to my label on that. I had a nice Amelanchier arborea. It's called shadbush, shadblow, juneberry, all the common names, and there's about 10. So you can remember all those, or you could remember Amelanchier arborea. But they're sub canopy, so that means they're going to be also very shade tolerant, and there are a lot of places where the sun is limited. So for shade or not, these are out in the middle of the street, so they don't need full shade. But it has beautiful white flowers, and the fruit in June, and we have a bunch on our campus that are horticultural varieties, and the fruit are bigger and there's more. And I would argue would rival blueberries. And I mean, they're not necessarily mushier, but the taste, I think, to me, it's a personal thing. They're delicious, and I've used them for, baking and some other things. It's also got great fall color. So Amelanchier arborea, it's on top of your list. And here's a tree that people have heard more and more about because I've been talking about it for the last 30 years, and that's the pawpaw. I grew up with this in northern Kentucky. It's also called the Indiana banana, but it's in a subtropical family in the Anaceae, and so the fruit has a tropical flavor. It is native to New York. If you go over to west of Buffalo to Erie State Park, that's where there's a native grove. It's very common in the Appalachians. In the landscape in central New York, it's an amazing plant. You can live it. 20, 30 years ago, a lot of these trees, I would suggest, people would ask, where do you get them? That's no longer an issue. If you can't find this, send me an email. I'll tell you exactly where to go. But a lot of nurseries now sell this because of the demand. But beautiful in flower in mid-May, great fall color, and those, if you know German meats, like a big fat bratwurst, but they taste like pineapple, vanilla, custard. And if you go to Stark Brother Nursery, you can buy this. And they have about 15 cultivars of this species that will have bigger fruit, later fruit, different flavored fruit. So this is one of these that you can easily get a hold of. I'll mention right now two of my favorite nurseries, and they're a little further south for you, of course, coming out of north of Syracuse. But I go down to Cayuga Landscaping on Trip Hammer Road. It's just north of Ithaca, so it's a great place to go to Cornell. It's now Cornell Botanical Garden, used to be Cornell Plantations. Dave was requesting to record with your computer. That's Christy went ahead to listen at the time. Whatever that means. So if you go down to Trip Hammer Road, it's the first exit as you get to the town of Ithaca. There's a Cayuga Landscaping, and they always have pawpaw, and they have persimmon. They're about $50. They're about head high. They're fruit probably next year. And then right around the corner is a place called the Plantsman, and it probably has the best selection of native plants, trees, shrubs, and herbs of any nursery in New York. And it's owned by Dan Siegel, who loves plants. He's really fun to talk to. But you can buy pawpaw and persimmon and most of the native plants I'm showing here at the Plantsman, or which is in Peru, it's called, but it's just off of Trip Hammer Road at Cayuga Landscape. So that's a good question. They have any more than one? Yes. So if you could see the flower, the inside of the flower, it has both sexes are there, but they're out of sync. So the male and female flowers ripen slightly offset, and a lot of fruit trees do this. So they have both sexes there, but they're not on the same page. And so having another one increases your fertilization. So did somebody?
When I put the control in. Okay.
So we're going to talk about pawpaw for an hour here. All right, here's another tree that's native to New York. In fact, if you know Owasco Lake, at the south end of Owasco is a fairly significant forested wetland. And it's the main place, it was the only place until we found some more of these. But there's a hickory that looks like shagbark, but the fruit is more just under the size of my fist in size. It's also called kingnut, and that's the shellbark hickory. So all the hickories are edible. All of them are delicious except for better enough hickory ones. But this one tastes to me like a big bowl of butter pecan without the sugar. It's incredibly delicious and nutritional. Now, the problem with some of these, so if you plant a serviceberry and pawpaw, you'll have fruit in a few years. When you plant hickories, you're looking at 20 years down the road. But there are some, there's one at Pass Arboretum in Syracuse, and they are in some cemeteries. So just be aware of, this is one of the most delicious tasting tree will live 300-400 years. It looks just like shagbark 5 leaflets. This one has 7. Very similar. This is a wetland hickory, and shagbark is typically in uplands. Shagbark is delicious too. It's just that the nuts are half the size. And here's, I'll say this is one of my favorites for all 100 of these. The persimmon is very limited in New York. Mostly was on Long Island where it was extirpated, but there are some places it occurs in the lower Hudson. And the persimmon has a fruit the size of a ping pong ball, and when it's ripe, it tastes like, imagine, I love apricots, but imagine taking an apricot and soaking it in honey for 2 weeks. That's what it tastes like. It's incredible. When it's ripe, when it's not ripe, it's another experience. It's a beautiful tree. It's another tree that'll live 200-300 years. It'll grow in the driest sites, the wettest sites, the shadiest, the sunniest, everything. And it's native to New York. Beautiful tree. Again, you can get these at some of these nurseries. Now there may be, I don't know the nurseries as well up here. So if anybody has an idea of a great native plant nursery up in this area, let me know, let everyone else. And black walnut has some downside or some concerns. If you don't want the nuts, it's not a good tree to have. The wood is valuable. I just saw another black walnut in the Midwest, single tree, sold for $100,000 on the road because the wood is peeled like the thickness of a playing card, and it's made into veneer that you put on less desirable woods. So the wood's always been valuable. The nuts, if you're not eating this, but you're eating walnuts you buy in the store, the English walnuts. The English walnuts are inferior. It's just, they're mild. They're on a scale of 1 to 10. They would have a walnut flavor of 3 compared to these would be like a 7 or 8. And you can buy black walnut if you don't want to mess with the nuts. There are places in Missouri now where you can buy black walnuts. A colleague of mine makes black walnut pies every fall. It is a really good tasting nut. So is the butternut, but I wouldn't plant butternut Judgment Scenario because it has a very lethal disease that's wiping it out. This one has a disease issue too, but it's not at the point where we want to stay away from it. Judgment's Niagara black walnut.
Got to be good ways to get to
Without getting stained?
Yeah, I know.
There isn't. That's part of the cool part. And serious black walnut pickers and users when they have chocolate colored hands because the dye it's actually the butternut was used to dye uniforms better and it's a beautiful chocolate colored dye. If it gets on your hands, then it's permanent. I mean, not when your skin cells, when they disappear, the dye goes with it. Beautiful dye, but you know, nothing's, no trees, perfect. Native versus non-native, this is a question. So since my native plant book came out in 2005, a starting point for all discussions is, what do you mean by native? Well, this is not a personal definition. And this is not a subjective definition. Now, people have made it that. If, you know, if they like it, it's native. No, that's not how it is. That doesn't work that way. So I wanted to clarify that. All right, so red maple. And there's a map. If you're not familiar with BONAP, the Biota of North America project. If you go to BONAP, for any vascular plant, native or not, it shows county verified herbarium specimens for every single species in the United States. All right, and here's how the color works. If even one county in a state is light green, meaning it's a verified herbarium specimen, then the whole county gets lit up. The whole state gets lit up. And it's a little misleading because don't pay attention to the green as much, the stark green, but it's the light green. So for red maple, and it's in all those other counties that don't have light green, it's not a herbarium specimen that the author of this checked. But this tells you there's no argument then. So let's say, so my brother was the restoration ecologist for the Northern Kentucky Center for Applied Ecology. And they were required that every restoration project, all the plants had to be propagated from the 3 counties that make up Northern Kentucky: Campbell, Boone, and Kenton. And so how do you know that? Well, because the map shows us where the plants are native. Let's say there's a project, let's say Oswego County wants to have an arboretum and they're only going to plant trees native to Oswego. How do you know that? Don't ask me, because I would go to this. You go to BONAP, Biota of North America project. Red buckeye, so let me use an extreme. Blue spruce, Picea pungens, is native. It's native to the United States, to 4 states in the United States. It's not native anywhere else. Red buckeye is native to the United States, to the mid-central eastern United States, but it's perfectly hardy here. We have it on campus, and if you're interested in hummingbirds, it is the best hummingbird magnet. As they migrate in mid-May, as they come back to this region, if you've got a red buckeye in mid-May, I was at Cornell Plantations years ago, 15 hummingbirds on one. I mean, it's pretty amazing, like being in a tropical conservatory. And so how do we know where red buckeye is native? If it has a county of this color green, then the whole state is shown as it being native. Well, there's some other colors, like the yellow, are more recent records. They're things that they're just details. They're nerdy botanical details.
There are 2 red buckeye trees up on the west side of Oswego.
Yeah, and they're doing fine. I mean, it's perfectly hardy here. Do you ever, I mean, a lot of you have seen that? It's really beautiful. But what's so neat is when the Columbine, Aqualesia canadensis, the red buckeye, and a select small group of plants, when they're at their bloom, that's when the hummingbirds are migrating back from their winter in the south. All right. All right, so, you know, does it even matter if it's native versus non-native? Some of it is subjective. But there are some examples where some non-native species are giving us more than a handful of problems. That, yeah, they were beautiful. Purple loosestrife was beautiful in the garden until it escaped into all of our wetlands. So that's something that, you know, it's a common theme. The Habitat Gardening Club of Central New York is a good example. I mean, their focus is on natives. So you won't be able to argue your way into using non-natives. For our forest food systems, we're thinking of incorporating species from around the world, as long as they're hardy and produce food, and we have a sense that they're not going to be non-native. All right, so just two of some examples of where, so Norway maple was planted here. It was 25% of all the street trees in Syracuse before the Labor Day storm. And after the Labor Day storm, it was very few percent because they all fell down. The Norway maple is now considered in the invasive plant literature one of the most invasive species in the United States. And in New York State, as of 2014, it is on the New York State prohibited and regulated plant list. It's regulated, you're allowed to sell it and buy it, but you have to put a tag on saying, the nursery people have to put a tag on saying, don't plant this, but if you have to, we'll sell it to you. Burning bush is another plant like that. So just because a nursery sells it, now legally, if they cannot sell burning bush and they can't sell this without that tag. There are a bunch of plants that are outright prohibited, so a nursery is prohibited to sell purple loosestrife. Even with that tag, you can't sell it. So it's a really neat publication. You just go to the web at New York State DEC prohibited plants, and the whole list comes up, really beautiful pictures, and explains the different categories. All right, so Norway maple is becoming a very serious. We do a lot of work on Long Island where the stands of trees look, they're just basically black locust and Norway maple, no subcanopy trees because of the shade, no subcanopy, no understory because of the deer. And so these are not particularly functional, ecologically functional stands. The calorie pears is another one of these trees that has, it looked great 40 years ago, but it has really become a major invasive plant problem. And I'm not talking about people complaining about, I'm talking about scientists studying the effects of these trees on every other layer in the forest. But Bradford pear, aristocrat pear, they're two of the many cultivars that are a problem. All right, so one of the things that I've always been surprised, my undergrad degrees in horticulture, I wanted to grow trees, I wanted to be a nursery person, until I wanted to be a director of an arboretum, until I wanted to do something else. I mean, so I was always surprised in the horticulture program that no one ever talked about where these trees were native. I thought red bow was from China, but then you don't hear anything about where they grow naturally, which helps us figure out where would they thrive in the landscape. And so I do most of what I think about are how site factors affect species distributions and their abundance. And so there are lots of trees that grow under these conditions. And so they would seem to tolerate any kind of wet conditions you could have in your landscape. Lots of trees tolerate, that's bare rot, these are the gunks, that's 400-year-old pitch pine. So they've been through a lot and they are incredibly drought tolerant. Not just the pitch pine, but all the plants with it. We have a lot of high pH soils in central New York, basically from west of Albany all the way to Buffalo up the Niagara Escarpment. And so there are a lot of plants that don't do well, the whole Ericaceae, the rhododendrons, azaleas. But there are a lot of plants that grow out of the cracks of this limestone bedrock, like the northern white cedar and bur oak. And we have a lot of high pH systems that a lot of species thrive on. We have a lot of species that thrive under shade. And so if it doesn't thrive under shade and you plant it there, it'll die. So you have to have an understanding, or you buy the books that have that information in, or you get it off the web. You just, in general, if you want to make an investment in planting, you have to understand some real basic ecology. All right, so what I've done is I'm going to go according to this list. I'm not going to say a whole lot about each one. For my dendro lectures, I teach dendro now. It'll be the 40th year coming up in August. I spend about 10, 15 minutes on each tree. We cover maybe 30, 40 slides on each tree. We're going to have a reduced version of that here, starting with the small trees. And some of these are very well known, like the striped maple. It's an understory tree. You know, foresters hate it. It takes up valuable growing space. And yet, if you know characteristics of bark from around the world, there's a very famous Chinese white bark maple. It's Acer tegmentosum. It's called the snake bark maple. And you'll pay $300-400 for it, or you can go out in the woods. These are not protected, and you can dig up a striped maple with the same characteristics for free. Beautiful fall color, very shade tolerant. I think the bark is one of the most beautiful barks. Now, as it gets bigger, the bark will eventually lose that color, but it's a short-lived tree anyway. But it's good for a good 25-30 years with that bark characteristic. So I put this in a pot in my backyard. I've been collecting maples, and this is a shrubby maple that is in cold swamps, and beautiful fall color. And it's only about 15 feet tall, but it's usually got 10, 15, 20 stems. So I spent a lot of time in cold swamps, and it's very common there. So looking for something for real shade conditions with great fall color. And I said it's growing really well in this pot I have on my patio. Devil's walking stick. We have a beautiful planting of it on our campus. So if you're looking for that winter unusual architecture, it's got the stem that's covered with, I mean, you wouldn't want to touch it. So if you put it somewhere, you don't want to have to do any kind of maintenance because it's very difficult to handle. But it's got this really big cluster of white flowers with the purple fruit. This is in the ginseng family. So you think of ginseng, it's a beautiful little plant. This is a monster plant in comparison. Root suckers, so if you put it in a spot, it'll spread out. And that leaf, that's one leaf, a lot of leaflets. That leaf is 3 feet long. It's a 3 foot long leaf. So architecturally, really is striking. Again, all these, I know Dan Siegel down at the placement sells these because I'm always looking at his catalog. We do a lot of consulting with various groups and mostly our campus. And we're always looking for these odd trees. Instead of looking all over the state, I just go right to the plantsman in Peruville. You know paper birch. Some of these, the downsides, when they get older, if they're stressed, they'll get the bronze birch borer. But before that, or if they're not stressed, they're one of the most beautiful native trees I can think of. And then we have the gray birch, which the bark isn't as creamy white, but it's a tougher tree. This is a bulletproof tree. Where I've seen it on abandoned mines, growing under pHs of 3, and so dry, and so sunny. This is a tree that may not be the most beautiful tree, but it's one that if you know trees, you've got to really respect it. It's just amazing. All the birches have beautiful gold fall color. This one's called musclewood because the wood looks a little bit, or the bowl looks like muscle, but it's really the American hornbeam. There's the European hornbeam. Now this is a little different. It's typically not in that fastigiate form like the European hornbeam is. Beautiful fall color, really neat bark. So if you're looking for something that in the winter has, when there's snow around this and the snow's on the bowl, it is so beautiful that a lot of times we only think about, well, what's got a pretty flower for 2 weeks in the summer? But in fact, a lot of these are more interesting the entire year. Eastern redbud. Eastern redbud is not native to New York. It's all over the place. It's naturalized. Naturalized means it's here, it's staying here. Consider it part of our flora, but it's not native. Native means what was here prior to pre-settlement. So native always means a space where, and always means a time when. And so Eastern redbud, it hasn't migrated here from Pennsylvania. It's been planted here and it just escapes cultivation, and it's everywhere now that there's a seed source. Beautiful fall color. The alternate leaf dogwood. So you heard about the flowering dogwood, and I didn't list it because the flowering dogwood is getting killed over its whole range by that's a fungus called anthracnose. And in the Appalachians, where there's more dogwood and they're closer together, it's wiping them out completely. In New York, the northern limit for a lot of these trees is between Syracuse and Oswego. And so their densities tend to be thinner and they don't have as much attraction to organisms that want to attack these trees. But this is a really nice alternative. It does not get any anthracnose. It doesn't have that beautiful little white bracts around the flowers, but the flower display isn't too shabby. All colors beautiful, great fruit display as well, and really neat architecture. I just bought one of these from another place I really enjoy going is over in Rome. There's a place called Volney's, and there's some really neat nurseries around here that offer unusual native plants. We have a lot of hawthorns that are native to New York, and they're typically old field, and we sort of dismiss them because people see them in old fields. But a lot of the species are beautiful in flower, fruit. This one has a 4-inch long thorn, so if you're looking for that hedge without having to invest in fencing, this is a pretty effective hedge. And probably if they were close enough, might impede the deer movement, maybe. So, you know, problem with common names. So burning bush is Euonymus elatus. It's called burning bush. It's illegal to plant that, sell it and plant that. This is actually native to New York. This is a burning bush native to New York. And it's got the weirdest common name, which doesn't help any, it doesn't help its cause, Eastern Wahoo. It's Euonymus atropurpureus, and it's a beautiful little small tree, and that's what the fruit looks like when it's ripe now. So I spent a lot of time in Ann Arbor visiting daughter and grandkids, and on their street are about 10 of the trees that I'm showing you here that maybe you've never thought about using. And this one, there's a beautiful specimen. In fact, I think that's where the one slide I took came from. The bigger slide I know came from that individual. This is a cool, where are you gonna find something like that? You're not gonna find it at Lowe's and Home Depot. But if you go to a place like the Plantsman, I think he's got this one too. Eastern hop bean, you know, there's nothing spectacular about it, but it'll last hundreds of years. It has no insect disease problems. A decent fall color, fruit display about every other year. Looks like hops to make beer. Pin cherry. So we have 3 native cherries in New York, and this one is my favorite. It's the least appreciated. There it is on the Chimney Bluffs State Park, coming up on that raw, eroded glacial material. A beautiful fall color, flowers and fruit. Fruits mature in the middle of the summer and they're red. They make great jams and jellies. Beautiful bark. The wafer ash kind of looks, you know, you want to freak people out with, kind of looks like poison ivy, but it has the same trifoliate leaf, really interesting seeds. See why it's called the wafer ash. The bark has this beautiful bronzy appearance with the lenticels. And you know, I've seen none of these are like nobody's ever planted them. They're planted by people who really appreciate plants. And when I visit people in properties, what I see planted immediately tells me to what extent those people really know their plants.
Is the wafer ash susceptible to the ash?
And no, it's not, because it's not an ash. So if you notice, I hyphenate. I should have hyphenated. So when I hyphenate something, this is the proper way when something isn't really what it's called. So here's a better example, the American mountain ash. I'm going to show you a picture. It's in the rose family. The problem with the ashes in the Oleaceae, the olive family, they're the ones that are susceptible. The true ashes, not the things that are called ashes. In this case, no, there's no problems with this. This is in the Rutaceae. It's a family that doesn't have a lot of local pest issues. One of the neatest oaks, I spent 25, 30 years of doing research on the Carter blue butterfly over in the Albany pine bush, and this is the dominant oak. It's head high, you know, maybe twice that high. Leaves are about that long. They look kind of like a black oak. It's the scrub oak. So we have 2 shrub oaks in New York State, the dwarf chestnut oak, Quercus praenoides, and Quercus ilicifolia, and they're 2 of the coolest oaks that I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And when you travel around, when I was in Turkey a few years ago, we saw oaks that even the best botanists weren't able to identify. But a lot of oaks are shrubby in other places. We sort of think of oaks as majestic big trees. Not always. But the American mountain ash, beautiful in flower and really nice fruit display. Not an ash. It's in the rose family, so the emerald ash borer cannot touch it. And then there's some viburnums, and viburnums we think of as mostly smaller shrubs, but there's some native viburnums that are small trees, and they're really beautiful throughout the year, like the nannyberry, Viburnum montago, so beautiful in flower, fruit, fall color, and the black haw, another native tree viburnum. And these pictures are all from our campus where we had some really nice specimens. All right, medium-sized trees. So red maple is one of those trees that you can't site incorrectly. It can go on the wettest, driest, every acidic, alkaline, every type of condition, it'll thrive. A lot of horticultural varieties that emphasize the fall color. Yellow birch, for about 25 to 50 years, the spark display there's nothing like it. And beautiful fall color. River birch, widely used already because of its tolerance to urban conditions. And these birches live a long time. They'll live probably 200 to 300 years. The hackberry, nothing outstanding about it, but it's a highly functional tree that will withstand the driest or wettest conditions. Eastern red cedar, here's a picture I took of it growing on the solvay waste beds. The pH is 8 at the surface and it's 12 inches below the surface. It's doing, that's pretty brutal conditions. It just has to be in sun. Great for birds. The eastern larch, which is common in our peatlands in upstate New York, often with black spruce, which in this photo, you see the black spruce in the background. But the eastern larch now, so it's in a wetland, but my neighbors across the street have it in a mounded upland, nowhere near water, and it's thriving. So just because a tree occurs in a wetland naturally, I can't think of any tree that has to be grown in a wetland that naturally occurs in a wetland. The magnolias, some of them are out of our reach because they're southern and they're not cold hardy. But this one's native to Long Island, and we've got it at the building that I work in. The building mass provides at least a full horticultural zone, warmer conditions. And so that's one way, is just simply finding the right side of your building or your house. And a lot of these will grow in places that might be otherwise marginally cold. The black gum, real common up from here. I look 481 on the drive. You see a lot of these in the fall on the side of the road. Pitch pine, here it is growing on pure granite. Here it is growing. That's not snow, that's raw quartzite sand in the pine barrens. There's not an ounce of NPK, there's nothing there, and this tree thrives. And I wish we would use this more. It's highly salt tolerant. It's deer tolerant. One of the biggest issues in planting today is what can I plant that the deer are not going to be a nuisance? This is a really good example. Pines in general are not eaten by deer. Eastern white pine will be because it's softer needles. The aspens, I actually took this picture along 481 many years ago. Quaking aspen grove, red maple underneath it, and the big tooth aspen. And I've seen them as street trees in Syracuse. They're tough trees. They only live 60, 70 years, but that's a pretty good amount of time for most landscapes. Sassafras, another thicket former. Beautiful foliage and really neat fruit in the fall. And you can make tea out of it. And, there's a potential that it's carcinogenic, and that would be, so what would it be for humans? It would be 5 gallons of sassafras tea every day for 20 years. So don't ever exceed that.
What work do they get?
Sassafras is like persimmon. And if I had a limited slide collection, I might think that sassafras and persimmon are dainty little trees. But also in my slide collection, I've got a picture of two sassafrases, one in Indiana and one in Kentucky. 48 inches in diameter, sassafras. And same with persimmon in floodplains in the Mississippi River Valley. It's all about the site. If the site is really rich and moist and fertile, it'll get really big. If it's really difficult, really dry, really infertile, they'll stay smaller. And so, it's good to know when you start planting things, what's the potential size. Northern white cedar, the oldest living tree in the northeastern United States, one on the Bruce Peninsula, aged at 1,700 years. That's the oldest living tree in the northeastern United States. The oldest living tree in the eastern United States are the bald cypress, 2,700 years in the Black River of North Carolina. Nothing compared to the great Methuselah, 5,500 years in the White Mountains of California. So tree longevity, it's all about the species. Some large trees. So if you got the space, you know sugar maple, it's our straight tree. But black maple, which is the exact same size, the exact same maple syrup production, the exact same hard as a rock wood. Black maple is very common in upstate New York. I don't know if I've ever seen, you could probably look for it now. It's got a really distinctive winter characteristic. The leaves are different. They're more three-lobed than the sugar maple. The fall color tends to be more like this. The fruits are identical. The bark is knobby. If you ever want to see one, Clark Reservation, if you walk any of the trails, most of what you think is sugar maple is actually black maple. There's sugar maple, of course. Sugar maple, 20% of all the trees in New York State naturally. Really no major problem with it. I mean, a lot of these trees have serious insect diseases. This one gets, forest tent caterpillar every few years and natural stands. But in the landscape, as long as you keep it away from salt, it's a really good tree. The shagbark hickory, delicious tasting fruits, great yellow fall color. Kentucky coffee tree, here's another tree that in New York State, one place naturally it occurs. So only one stand that it's known to be native, and that's over in Montezuma. And it's a root suckering tree, so there's a big grove of it. But we've got it planted near our campus. There must be 25 going down Euclid. They're this big around, it tolerates the driest, most precarious alkaline conditions. The leaves are this big, so that's one leaf. Bipinnately compound, so that's one leaf here. Great fall color. And growing along Euclid with all of the salt, all of the dryness, all of the fraternities, all the junk on it, this tree is thriving. It's a beautiful tree, native to New York. Kentucky coffee tree, it's a legume. Sweet gum. Yellow poplar. Now, some of these trees are big, and so you wouldn't put them in a small property. And some of these trees get so massive over time that, when they fall, they can destroy property. So I never park under a yellow poplar that's over probably a foot in diameter because they're relatively weak wooded, but what a beautiful flower in the middle of June. It's also called tulip tree. Related, so it's the same family, the Magnoliaceae for both yellow poplar and Magnolia cuminata. Your cucumber tree, this one is just like a lot of the species. It comes right up between Syracuse and Oswego naturally, but it'll grow further north. That flower is so beautiful. Unfortunately, it's up in the tree in the middle of May, and you often are looking at the underside of it, but it's a beautiful tree. The American sycamore, eastern white pine. And then we have so many oaks in New York. Maybe you're not aware of all of them, but it's actually not as rich as the Midwest. But we have white oak, Quercus alba, We have swamp white oak, really big old specimen. Swamp white oak will live for 400 years. And the great urban trees, one of the best urban trees there is. Used to be in a swamp naturally, does great along the street. The scarlet oak. Bur oak and the chestnut oak up at the, or down from here, down at Whiskey Hollow at the corner of Onondaga County. Beautiful, big, mature stand of chestnut oak. Chickapin oak, if you go to Clark Reservation and just east of Syracuse, there's 200, 300, 400-year-old chickapin oaks growing at Clark Reservation. Pin oak, these are all native to New York, and they all have, they can be used for different things, different purposes, not just for shade, but some are really good for the streets. This one is a little bit more site sensitive, so I wouldn't use it a whole lot in a heavily salted boulevard in northern red oak. And this was recently discovered in New York over near Niagara Falls. It's called the Shumard oak. It kind of looks like a pin oak, but a real common oak is actually from the woods where I grew up in northern Kentucky here, Shumard oak. And black oak, very common oak in upstate New York. And then the American basswood or linden is most famous for its, some of the best honey ever produced is from basswood or linden honey. Blooms in the end of June. All right, so I'm going to mention a few trees that we're thinking about. I don't think I've got 50 to 100 years left to wait for these to show up on their own. They're not going to show up on their own anyway because the landscape is so fragmented. If you look at historical plant migration back before urbanization, we know how long it takes for a lot of these trees to migrate. That's not going to happen anymore. So let's think about helping them a little. How about the pecan? Pecan is very common in the Midwest. This is another one. You go to Stark Brothers catalog and you'll see some pecans, the native pecan, native to this further south. You'll see some hardier versions being sold. And you probably all tasted pecan. I mean, yeah, it's one of the best nut trees I can think of. And we're starting to think about incorporating this into our food forest systems. We're not going to wait for it to show up. The red buckeye, well, we're already planting red buckeye. It's already proven. There's no question that it's cold hardy here. But you see this one planted a lot in cemeteries. It's the yellowwood. It's native to southern Indiana, central Kentucky, where I grew up. And it's an extraordinary tree, all seasons. Early June, the flower clusters. It's a legume. It has that pea-shaped flower. Great fall color. And if you like to work wood, the wood is the brightest yellow. I don't know of any tropical tree that has this bright yellow wood. It is really beautiful. I've got a spoon in my office made out of it. Yellow wood. Sourwood, a very central southern Appalachian tree. It's in the heath family, the Ericaceae. Here it is in flower in July. And here it is in full fall color along Mass Avenue, right outside of Harvard's main campus, where it's been used as a street tree for over 100 years. I can't tell you how bad those conditions are for growing anything. And this tree is thriving. It's not just one, it's a bunch of them. And you know, I never hear people planting sourwood in central New York, but we have one out at our experiment station that's perfectly hardy. Yeah.
There's one down along Route 48, just south of Fulton.
Yeah.
On the west side of the road, right where the inlet comes in, with a little dip in the road, for all of you who know that. Okay, and it's off to the right now, those colors won't show up.
Well, so who would have planted it? I mean,
Whoever owns the place.
so
Sometimes.
professor, usually a professor does.
No, I didn't plant it.
Was it you? There's a tree from Turkey planted in a neighborhood close to campus that, so I have a deal with the students for dendro. If they bring something in from anywhere in the world, except for tropics, that I can't identify, I'll give them a prize. And so this student brings this tree, it looks like sugar maple, and it wasn't sugar maple. And here it's growing in the campus area that I drove by 100 times. And I finally figured it out. It wasn't easy, but it was a Turkish tree that's 75 years old. And I'm trying to find the professor responsible because these things just don't pop up randomly. Anyway, this is a really, really choice, medium-sized tree called sourwood. Southern red oak, so we had this out at our experiment station in Syracuse, and it's, the willow oak was right next to it. The willow oak was killed by the 15 below the year I moved here in '85. The southern red oak is still fine. It's a beautiful tree, really cool leaf, southern red oak. And swamp chestnut oak, a big nut producer if you're interested in acorns for wildlife. This is really wildlife plant. Beautiful fall color with swamp chestnut oak. So these are all southern species naturally. In some cases, they're 2 or 3 states to the south. In some cases, well, in this case, this is native to Florida. This is planted all over Ann Arbor. This picture is actually from down in Virginia, but the pond cypress, if you looked at a range map and you saw that it's basically Florida, why would you think this should ever have a chance here in Syracuse and Oswego? But it thrives in Ann Arbor. That's the leaves, those are the leaves fully emerged. And the difference between pond cypress, Taxodium ascendens, and bald cypress is that bald cypress has a longer needle. Both of these are side by side in the Pass Arboretum. If you ever come down to the zoo in Syracuse, the Pass Arboretum has some pretty cool trees. Are they labeled? No, they're not labeled. That's the downside. Send me a picture, I'll tell you what it is. But bald cypress, so 2,700 years longevity. It has these pneumatophores that come out of the water. So if you've got a water feature, this would be a striking tree. It'll develop what are called knees, pneumatophores. They're not functional, but they look neat. And it's just such a neat tree. So it'll grow in 10 feet of water for 2,700 years. But I've also seen it planted in Ann Arbor. It's all along the streets now because they lost all of their green and white ash. They had to replace tens of thousands of trees along the city streets. Don't plant these eastern hemlock because of the adelgid. So now if you're sure you're in a cold pocket and you're sure that the adelgid will not get there, but we were thinking that it would never get to Syracuse, it's there. We were thinking it would never get to Auburn, it's there. It's everywhere we thought it would never get. And so be aware that this is a really serious insect from Japan. White ash, what a beautiful native tree. Green ash, one of the most important street trees in the whole eastern United States. Drought tolerant, salt tolerant, beautiful yellow fall color, but the emerald ash borer loves it too. So there are no resistant ashes. That also includes around here, there's probably any wet pockets and black ash. It kills every single ash. American elm, it's not just Dutch elm disease, but elm yellows will take out any that survives Dutch elm disease, and they're still not resistant. There's some books references if you have an interest in learning more of the native plants of the Northeast. If you're interested beyond the tree layer and the tree book here that I already mentioned. All right, I think that's it.
Dawn redwoods.
So Metasequoia glyphostroboides, the Dawn redwood, grows great. No insect disease problems. Is the biggest ones in the country planted in 1950 when it was introduced here. They're over 200 feet tall. So I think the Dawn redwood, if you know coastal redwood, the Dawn redwood, I think, looks like it has the potential to reach that stature of near 300 feet. It's deciduous. That's the difference between the Dawn redwood and the coastal redwood. Dawn redwood is deciduous, which lets it thrive up in Oswego here. What a really cool tree. It looks a lot like bald cypress, but yeah,
back one right across the street from their house.
Oh, yeah.
Right, about 15 feet from that door, and it's
Yeah.
right across the street from their house.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't hesitate planting. I mean, you have to have space for it.
A lot of people come around and hug that.
Oh, yeah, it's cool.
No, but our DPW has been planting them as street trees, and I was wondering if that.
Well, so then the issues are, do you have the root space for it? It can't go in a median next to a sidewalk, but a boulevard down the street would be fine. Parks would be fine. But, so I planted one, I grew one in 1980 as a graduate student at Kentucky for a project. And I had to get rid of it, and so I planted it at my father-in-law's house in Devon, Pennsylvania in 1980. That thing is now this big around, and that's not at the base, it's bigger. It, I planted it, what happened to be sort of a connection to sewage, whatever, and the thing is just unbelievable, but beautiful tree. On redwood, metasequoia, eucalyptus boys, and there's a gold version of it. Actually seen it at Home Depot, so, yeah.
You just mentioned beech trees. Yeah. We have a lot of beech trees in this area.
So I didn't mention beech for a lot of reasons. So all the beeches that are planted that thrive are one of dozens of cultivars of the European beech, Fagus sylvatica. And Fagus sylvatica does not get the beech bark disease. I mean, not to the point where it's anything to worry about. The European beech does a root sucker. The few cases where we've planted American beech, it's not easy to establish in the ground. It just doesn't take off for a while. The American beech, as bad as the beech bark disease has been, the new elm leaf, the new beech leaf disease may be the most serious disease yet for anything American beech has faced. And it's all over between north of here and south of here. It's just starting to hit Syracuse. It's caused by a nematode. And if you look at an American beech leaf, so look at it this year, it's got this really odd penny venation. So it's almost like there's rectangular lines of leaf. And if you look at the leaf and you see bands, lanes that are starting to yellow with the green in between, that's the nematode that causes that. And it is killing beech over a huge area. So I'd be hesitant to plant American beech, one of the most beautiful trees. I mean, I've left out some of the most beautiful trees in North America that are native to New York, but there are some things happening that, you can't spray for this, like for the hemlock woolly adelgid. If you have a hemlock, like I've got 2 dwarf hemlocks in my garden, I can easily spray them in February with a dormant oil spray to kill the adelgid. But if you've got a stand of hemlock, you can't do that. But as a homeowner, if you've got a specimen, you can spray for some things. You can't spray for the elm, for the beech nematode. So. Other questions? Yeah.
With the ash tree, if you have a couple that are doing okay and they've got a bit of a canopy, do you treat them or not?
So you can actually treat ash, and a lot of homeowners have done this, and some parks have done it. Onondaga Lake Park had over 4,000 green and white ashes, and they decided they couldn't afford to treat most of them. They treated the ones with the Christmas lights on for the Christmas display. If you treat that ash, it'll run about $150 for about an 18-inch diameter tree. So the amount depends on the diameter. And you have to do the treatment every 2 to 3 years. So you can keep an ash alive. Now, if you've got an ash that you've never treated and it really is still looking good, you can ensure that it will continue to look good by treating it, or you can take your chances and you might be that one in a bajillion with a tree that isn't susceptible. But this is happening, this whole debate about, do you get rid of all the trees before the disease or insect enters? So a colleague of mine just told me that some people have found some hemlocks that have been in the hemlock delicate area, but they found some hemlocks that are absolutely resistant to the delicate. How would you know that if you got rid of all the hemlock? Which is what they're doing in most places. They're actually in advance, 20 miles away, they're cutting all the hemlock because they don't want to give the delicate an opportunity. So these are tough calls, you just don't know. So.
We're not gonna tell people about our hemlock road.
Do you have a nice one? Do you treat it?
They're perfectly healthy.
Yeah, and do you treat it at all, or
No, absolutely not.
maybe cold related or not? Just lucky,
I don't know, given the last 10 years, 5 out of the last 10 years,
it's
we lost
really,
all of our spring herbs
yeah,
because of the warm temperatures, but not,
I'm down the woolly field with a hemlock up near the tower here on campus.
there's a delicate up here.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of that. We have it on, in our campus trees, and it's not just eastern hemlock, but a more beautiful native hemlock, some would argue, is the Carolina hemlock. It's native to the southern Appalachians. It's really distinct looking. We've got them both side by side out at our experiment station. The Carolina was heavily hit by the delicate. It's not bothering the adjacent one that's native to the northeast Camdensis. Other questions of any kind about any tree we covered or any tree you hoped I would cover, but I didn't yet?
I got a question. We live right on Lake Ontario, the winters are terrible. And it dries out everything. It's a hard place to grow anything. Is there a particular type of spruce that we could plant, like a Norway spruce? Would,
So,
maybe grow in
yeah,
those kind of conditions?
I would never advocate planting Norway spruce anywhere but Norway. But the problem with spruces is, so we have 3 spruces native to New York: black, white, and red. Sitka spruce, Pacific Northwest, Norway spruce, native to Europe and Asia. Every spruce has a shallow root system. And so it would be the least, I would never think of anything shallow rooted. Now, some of the pines, to the pine that the crown is so bad naturally that you wouldn't even know it if it was windswept, would be jack pine. So jack pine is a true boreal pine. It's all across Canada, the first 2/3. And it has a taproot and it grows on raw sands. It doesn't have the majestic form of eastern white pine, but any kind of wind will destroy the form of eastern white pine. But jack pine, pitch pine would be indestructible. And pitch pine is native up on the St. Lawrence. And so we know it's perfectly hardy here. Other conifers, I wouldn't touch any fir because the firs are typically subalpine, moisture demanding species.
Aren't the cypress, pretty much native around the lakes?
The cypress. So, so there's no native cypress to New York, but bald cypress, is sort of in the same family, but it's not, a true cypress. Cypress is cupressus. Cedars are, yeah, so
Yeah.
cedars are another tree that the problem is that their root systems may not be deep enough, but they do tend to go deeper on more upland conditions. But yeah, that's a great windswept bond. I do bonsais very poorly, and this idea of windswept forms and weeping forms, that sort of thing really, I don't mind if a tree is bent over, that's fine with me. I like that appearance. And yeah.
The American beech nematode, how does that spread? Nematode is a worm mycota?
I don't know the exact spread, but it's spreading fairly aggressively across the range. I don't know if it spreads by fallen leaves that then blow. But you can find a lot of information about it if you're curious. And if you've got beech that you have seen regularly, you might want to start looking at the leaves for this purpose. It's just showing up, but where it has been for a few years, it's devastating the American beech. The beech bark disease, there's plenty of resistant trees to beech bark disease, but this one looks like a much worse disease issue. Any other question? Yeah.
It does the Copper Beach, that proposing one.
So
Have the same issues.
Yeah, Cotton Beach is one of the many varieties of the European beach, Agus sylvatica. The European beach does not have any of these serious issues. It doesn't root sprout either, which some people don't think is a pretty nice trait to have if you're trying to manage a landscape. Anything else? You can always reach me easy at the college. My email address is all over the place, but if you ever have questions about plants or trees, always happy to look at images and try to guess what's going on with whatever the issue is. So thank you for coming today, and it's great to be here.
Last week, it was in a major report for everyone to do. And turns out a lot of plants from around and brought in overseas because of that portal. We got that Dawn Redwood apparently in the early 1950s. Because it had to come in on some ship from Asia. Right after it was discovered in the wild. But other trees, there are several conifers on campus, which are probably imports that way, because of especially imports around 1800, 1840s, 1900, after the First World War, after the Second World War. So Oswego area is a good place to get wild trees. There used to be a big tree on the east side of Oswego. Nestled in southeast side of a house, but apparently the climate eventually took care of it.
Yeah. Anything else? Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to have a nice crowd. And if everybody who commented on the beautiful drive on the way in stops and takes pictures, you may have a slow time getting out of here. I think I can keep it acquired by the looks of faces, but if you're not an RCA member, please consider joining. The brochure over there, as Tristan mentioned earlier, our memberships are very reasonable. And I also just wanted to mention, many of you are aware, we have this wonderful accessible trail project going on. And we've gotten some wonderful donations from different variations of the Shinneman Foundation and some other sources. And when we get that trail up and running, it's gonna make it so even more people can go out and enjoy our trees and all the beautiful sights here. So be looking into that. We did get a beautiful article written by the alumni office, and it's on their alumni page under university advancement. But if you are an RCA member, I'm gonna have my husband send out that address so you can look at that as well. But it was nice to get some coverage from the alumni office for that because of a number of alumni that are on the board and such. They decided to write an article, so that was really nice. So again, thank you all very much. Please do sign in. It helps us to keep track of how many people are attending these things, and enjoy the rest of your day. It's a beautiful one. Thank you so much.